My boyfriend's mom filed for emergency custody of my baby, then sat across from me in a counseling session and said, "You're a scared little girl playing mommy. It's time to grow up and let him go." When I tried to stand up for myself, she laughed and said, "You think a judge will believe a basement baby story?" I didn't say a word. That was 2 months ago. This morning, she was crying in her driveway while her husband packed a bag. My dad had me when he was 17, and he always told me that I was the reason he ended up broken and alone. Because of him, I grew up with extremely low self-esteem and trust issues. And when I myself made a mistake and became pregnant at 16, I was absolutely terrified. I remember crying my eyes out, unsure of what to do. In the end, I decided not to tell him. I just couldn't. Instead, I went to the only person who ever seemed to care about me, my grandmother. She was my mom's mom, and my mom left when I was a baby, so she was the only connection I had to that whole side of the family. She never liked my dad, said he abandoned my mom when she was pregnant, then showed up years later acting like a hero when it was already too late. As soon as he showed up, my mom left me. Grandma refuses to tell me why. Still, when I told her I was pregnant, she didn't yell. She didn't look disappointed. She hugged me. She said she'd help me figure it out. We agreed that I'd hide the pregnancy, stay in school, and once the baby was born, we'd make a plan. Her house was too small, and my dad would never let me live with her, so we agreed on something kind of crazy. I'd keep the baby in our basement. I know how that sounds, but it wasn't some dirty, dark place. We cleared out a space, added a heater and blankets and supplies. My boyfriend Liam would come by through the side door when my dad was working. He brought diapers, formula, whatever we needed. It wasn't perfect, but we were surviving. I hid my pregnancy by staying as far away from my dad as possible, and because he was so emotionally absent, it really wasn't hard. My baby Noah was born in secret at my grandma's house. I didn't go to the hospital. We had a retired nurse help with it, someone my grandma knew from church. After that, I took care of my son every night in the basement while my dad thought I was doing homework or watching TV. I was exhausted all the time. Liam helped when he could, but he was working too. We were waiting until I turned 17 so we could get a place together and be free. But then everything exploded one night in the middle of January. The furnace broke and the house was freezing. My dad was trying to find the space heaters, and I knew before he even opened the basement door that this was it. I heard him go down there. Then I heard silence. Then footsteps back up the stairs, but slower. When he came into the kitchen, he was holding a tiny sock in his hand, and his face looked like he'd seen a ghost. He didn't yell. He just asked, "Whose baby is in my house?" I wanted to lie, but I couldn't. I told him the truth, and he lost it. He was pacing and shouting and saying, "You ruined your life," and "How could you do this in my house?" and "Is this what I worked my butt off for?" I told him I was leaving, taking my baby and going to grandma's. He tried to stop me, but I was done. I left that night with my baby in a car seat and my grandma waiting in the driveway. The next few weeks were awful. My dad didn't call. I didn't call him. Grandma was stressed out. She blamed him for everything. She said if he'd just shown me grace, maybe I wouldn't have felt like I had to hide. But I knew part of it was my fault too. I didn't trust him to tell him the truth. I had just assumed he'd hate me the way he seemed to hate himself. Then it got worse. Liam's parents found out. His mom even offered to pay him to walk away and leave me. She told him she'd give enough so he could go to college out of state and start fresh. But he said no. He chose to stay. My dad somehow found out, and to my surprise, he said he respected Liam for that. I think he just saw his younger self in Liam, but maybe a version of him that could do better. Things were almost looking up for a while. My dad seemed to accept Noah when we spoke over the phone, but then my grandma had a heart attack. It was minor, but it was enough to scare me. I had to go back to my dad's house. There wasn't anywhere else. He didn't say much at first, just set up the crib in my room and went back to work. And for a few months, things were okay. My baby was growing, my dad was more involved, and Liam was as present as a dad in his situation could be. But then it happened. We were trying to rebuild something one night when CPS showed up. Someone had reported an unfit environment for an infant. All hell broke loose. My grandma thought my dad did it. My dad thought grandma did it. They argued in front of the social worker about it. It was a mess. The worker had to get them to calm down. We sat down with her soon after and explained everything, the entire history, the full truth of how Noah got here. And that's when she revealed something that made my jaw drop. The person who reported us wasn't grandma or my dad. It was Liam's mom, Jessica. She wanted the baby taken away so Liam wouldn't have to ruin his life. My jaw literally dropped. I knew Jessica didn't approve of me, but I never thought she'd go this far. She wants Noah taken away, I said, the realization hitting me hard. She thinks if Noah's gone, Liam will go to college and forget about us. Dad looked furious. Grandma reached over and squeezed my hand. The CPS worker, who I will call Barbara, explained that the case would remain open while they investigated. She said they'd need to interview Liam and his parents too. Before she left, she told me that in cases like this, they try to keep families together if possible, but I needed to demonstrate that I could provide proper care for Noah. As soon as she left, I called Liam. He was shocked when I told him about his mom. He swore he had no idea she would do something like this. I believed him. Liam's always been honest with me, sometimes brutally so. He promised to talk to his mom, make her understand that this wasn't helping anyone. The next few weeks were intense. I was constantly on edge, worried that CPS would show up again and take Noah. I made sure the house was spotless. I kept detailed records of Noah's feedings, diaper changes, and naps. I read every baby book I could find at the library. Dad helped more than I expected, installing baby gates and outlet covers throughout the house. Liam confronted his mom, but it didn't go well. He came over afterward with a red mark on his cheek where she'd slapped him. I was horrified, but he brushed it off. He said his mom was just upset and would come around eventually. I wasn't so sure. There was something in Jessica's eyes when she looked at me and Noah, something cold and calculating. A week later, Jessica showed up at our house. Dad let her in before I could object. She was wearing this fake sympathetic expression that made my skin crawl. She said she wanted to apologize and help us work things out. I didn't trust her for a second, but Dad seemed to buy it. He offered her coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table while I stood by the doorway, ready to grab Noah and run if needed. I realize now that I overreacted, Jessica said, stirring sugar into her coffee. I was just worried about Liam's future, but I see how much he cares about you and the baby. She suggested that we all meet with a family counselor to discuss how to co-parent effectively. cautiously. It sounded reasonable on the surface, but something felt off. Why the sudden change of heart? I agreed cautiously, mostly to get her out of our house. After she left, Dad said he thought she seemed sincere. I wasn't convinced. Grandma was even more suspicious when I told her about it on the phone later. She warned me to be careful, that people like Jessica don't change overnight. The family counseling session was scheduled for the following week at some office downtown. Liam seemed hopeful that his mom was finally accepting our situation. I wanted to believe it too, but I couldn't shake this feeling of dread. The day before the counseling session, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was a screenshot of an email from Jessica to a lawyer, discussing options for getting custody of Noah. The text just said, "Thought you should see this. Be careful tomorrow." No signature, no explanation of who sent it. I later found out it was from Quinn, one of the nurses at the pediatrician's office who had overheard Jessica discussing her plans while there for her own appointment. I tried calling the number back, but it was disconnected. I showed the text to Dad and Grandma. Dad thought it might be fake, someone trying to stir up trouble. Grandma wasn't so sure. She suggested we cancel the counseling session, but I wanted to know what Jessica was planning. If she was trying to take Noah, I needed to be prepared. The counseling office was in this fancy building with leather chairs and abstract art on the walls. Jessica and her husband Joseph were already there when we arrived. Liam came separately from work, still in his grocery store uniform. The counselor, Dr. Taylor, seemed nice enough, asking us all to introduce ourselves and explain our relationship to Noah. Everything was going fine until Jessica started talking about how concerned she was about Noah's well-being. She mentioned the CPS visit, twisting the facts to make it sound like I was completely negligent. I tried to defend myself, but she kept interrupting. "I just think Noah deserves better," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Casey is so young, and she's already made so many mistakes." That's when she pulled out a folder and handed it to Dr. Taylor. It contained printouts of social media posts from before I was pregnant, showing me at parties. Nothing wild, just normal teenage stuff. But she was making it seem like I was some out-of-control party girl. There were also medical records showing I'd missed some prenatal appointments because I was hiding the pregnancy, and a statement from one of Liam's friends claiming he'd seen me drinking while pregnant. A complete lie. I was blindsided. I later learned that Jessica had a friend who worked in medical records at the clinic where I'd gone for my one prenatal visit, which is how she accessed my private information. Dr. Taylor looked uncomfortable as she flipped through the folder. Liam jumped to my defense, saying his mom was lying and manipulating the situation. His dad just sat there looking at the floor. "I think we should consider a temporary custody arrangement," Jessica said smoothly. "Joseph and I could take Noah until Casey and Liam are more established. We have a stable home, financial security." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was trying to take my baby, right there in front of everyone. I grabbed Noah's carrier and stood up. "This isn't counseling," I said, my voice shaking. "This is an ambush." I walked out with Noah, Liam right behind me. I could hear Jessica telling Dr. Taylor that my emotional outburst just proved her point. Dad and Grandma were waiting in the parking lot. They'd driven separately. One look at my face and they knew something had gone wrong. On the drive home, I told them everything. Dad was furious. I'd never seen him so angry on my behalf before. He kept saying we needed a lawyer, but I knew we couldn't afford one. Grandma was quiet, which was unusual for her. When we got home, she asked to hold Noah while I calmed down. "We need to be smart about this," she finally said. "Jessica has money and connections. We need to be one step ahead of her." The next day, Jessica sent Liam a text saying that if he didn't convince me to do the right thing and let them take Noah temporarily, she would make sure CPS took him away completely. She claimed to have friends in the system who could make it happen. Liam showed me the text, his hands shaking with anger. I was terrified. Could she really do that? Did she actually have connections in CPS? I didn't know, but I couldn't take the risk. Grandma suggested I document everything, every threat, every lie, every manipulation. She dug out an old tape recorder from her closet and told me to keep it with me whenever Jessica was around. 2 days later, Barbara from CPS came for another home visit. This time she brought a colleague named David. They asked more detailed questions about my relationship with Liam, my plans for the future, and how I was handling motherhood. I answered honestly, trying not to show how nervous I was. Then David mentioned that they'd received another call, this time alleging that I was planning to leave the state with Noah. "That's not true," I said immediately. "Who told you that?" They couldn't say, but I knew it was Jessica. She was trying to make me look unstable and unreliable. I showed them the text she'd sent Liam, explaining that she was trying to manipulate the situation to get custody of Noah. David seemed concerned and made a note of it, but Barbara's face remained neutral. After they left, I broke down crying. It felt like everything was spiraling out of control. Dad awkwardly patted my shoulder, then surprised me by pulling me into a real hug. It was the first time he'd hugged me since I was little. "We're not going to let them take Noah," he said firmly. "I didn't do right by you growing up, but I'm going to do right by you and Noah now." His words meant more to me than he probably realized. For the first time, I felt like we were actually on the same team. The next week was a blur of CPS visits, threatening texts from Jessica, and sleepless nights. Liam's dad Joseph showed up one evening looking uncomfortable. He said he didn't agree with what Jessica was doing, but he didn't know how to stop her. He slipped me an envelope with $500 in cash, saying it wasn't much but might help if we needed a lawyer. I was surprised. I'd always thought Joseph was completely under Jessica's thumb. Then things got even weirder. I started noticing a black SUV parked down the street from our house. The same car would sometimes follow me when I took Noah to the doctor or to visit Grandma. I pointed it out to Dad, who took down the license plate number but couldn't see who was driving through the tinted windows. One day, I was at the grocery store with Noah when I ran into Jessica. She acted surprised to see me, but I had a feeling it wasn't a coincidence. She cooed over Noah, asking to hold him. I refused as politely as I could. Her smile tightened. "You know, Casey, this would all be so much easier if you'd just be reasonable," she said, her voice low. "Liam has such a bright future ahead ahead of him. Don't you want what's best for both of them? What's best for Noah is to be with his parents, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. His parents? She laughed. Your children playing house. Noah deserves better. I had the tape recorder in my pocket, secretly recording everything. As I turned to leave, Jessica grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. This isn't over, she hissed. One way or another, I'm going to make sure my son doesn't throw his life away because of your mistake. I pulled away and hurried to the checkout, my heart pounding. When I got to the car, I noticed a piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. It was a handwritten note. I can help you with Jessica. Meet me at the library tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone. It wasn't signed. I showed the note to Dad and Grandma when I got home. Dad thought it was a trap, that Jessica was trying to lure me somewhere to cause trouble. Grandma wasn't so sure. She thought it might be Joseph trying to help, or maybe even one of Jessica's friends who disagreed with what she was doing. After much debate, we decided I would go, but not alone. Dad would come with me but stay out of sight. If anything seemed off, I'd text him immediately. I was nervous about the meeting, but also desperate for any help we could get. The library was quiet when I arrived, just a few elderly people reading newspapers and a couple of students studying. I sat at a table near the back, where I could see the entrance. At exactly 2 p.m., a woman walked in. It took me a moment to recognize her without her navy pantsuit. It was Barbara from CPS. She sat down across from me, glancing around nervously. I shouldn't be doing this, she said quietly. But what Jessica Reese is doing isn't right. Barbara explained that Jessica had indeed called in the original complaint, but she'd also been calling repeatedly since then with new allegations. She'd even sent emails with doctored photos trying to make it look like Noah was being neglected. Barbara had become suspicious when the allegations kept changing, and none of them matched what she'd observed during her visits. She claimed to know my supervisor, Barbara said. She implied that if I didn't recommend removing Noah, she'd make trouble for me. But I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I know a vendetta when I see one. I was shocked. Jessica had gone even further than I thought. Barbara advised me to keep documenting everything, and to consider getting a restraining order if Jessica's behavior escalated. She couldn't officially help me beyond doing her job fairly, but she wanted me to know what we were up against. As she got up to leave, she paused. For what it's worth, from what I've seen, you're doing a good job with Noah. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Her words gave me a boost of confidence I desperately needed. I texted Dad that everything was okay, and he met me outside. On the drive home, I filled him in on what Barbara had said. He was quiet for a while, then said, "Your mom would be proud of you." It was the first time he'd mentioned my mom in a positive way. I wanted to ask more, but I could tell from his expression that the subject was closed for now. When we got home, there was a fancy envelope in the mailbox. Inside was an invitation to a mediation session at Jessica and Joseph's house that weekend. The invitation said it would be a chance for all of us to discuss Noah's future in a neutral, supportive environment. Dad snorted when he read that part. Their house is about as neutral as a Shark Tank, he muttered. I knew it was probably another trap, but ignoring it might make us look uncooperative to CPS. After talking it over with Grandma and Liam, we decided I would go, but with backup. Dad, Grandma, and Liam would all come with me. Safety in numbers. The day of the mediation, I was a nervous wreck. I dressed Noah in his cutest outfit and packed an extra full diaper bag. I wore the nicest clothes I had, jeans without holes and a sweater Grandma had given me for Christmas. I wanted to look responsible and mature, not like the reckless teenager Jessica was painting me as. Jessica and Joseph's house was in the fancy part of town, with manicured lawns and 3-car garages. Their living room was straight out of a magazine, white couches that looked like no one ever sat on them, and glass tables with no fingerprints. I immediately felt out of place. To my surprise, Dr. Taylor from the counseling center was there, along with a man Jessica introduced as William, their family attorney. My stomach dropped. We hadn't brought a lawyer. We couldn't afford one. I glanced at Dad, who looked as uncomfortable as I felt. Before we begin, Jessica said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, I thought we could all have some refreshments. She gestured to a spread of fancy cheese and crackers on the dining table. As we awkwardly stood around the food, Jessica pulled me aside saying she wanted to show me something in the kitchen. Remembering Grandma's advice, I slipped my hand into my pocket and turned on the tape recorder. In the kitchen, Jessica dropped the friendly act. This can go one of two ways, she said in a low voice. Either you agree to let us take Noah temporarily while you and Liam finish school, or we take this to court. And trust me, you don't want that. Is that a threat? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. It's reality, Casey. We have resources you don't. We can provide for Noah in ways you simply can't right now. Don't you want what's best for him? What's best for him is to be with his mother, I said firmly. Jessica's face hardened. His mother is a child who hid her pregnancy and kept a baby in a basement for weeks. How do you think that will sound to a judge? Before I could respond, Liam walked in. He must have seen something in my face because he immediately asked what was going on. Jessica switched back to her sweet voice, saying we were just having a heart-to-heart. When we returned to the living room, William the attorney started explaining the agreement they'd drawn up. It outlined a plan where Noah would live with Jessica and Joseph during the week, and I could have him on weekends. They would cover all his expenses and set up a college fund for him. In exchange, I would agree not to interfere with their parenting decisions. It wasn't J-int custody they were offering. It was them taking my son and allowing me limited visitation. I looked at Liam, who seemed as shocked as I was. Dad was turning red with anger, and Grandma's lips were pressed into a thin line. This is ridiculous, Dad burst out. You can't just take someone's child because you have more money. Jessica smiled tightly. We're offering a solution that benefits everyone, especially Noah. If Casey truly loves her son, she'll want what's best for him. That's when I'd had enough. I stood up, holding Noah close to my chest. What's best for Noah is to grow up knowing his parents love him and never thought of him as a burden or a mistake. I'm not signing anything. Jessica's smile disappeared. Then we'll see you in court. And don't think for a minute that you'll win. As we were leaving, Joseph followed us out to to the car. He looked uncomfortable, glancing back at the house like he was afraid Jessica might see him talking to us. I'm sorry about all this, he said quietly. Jessica, she gets fixated on things. Once she decides something, there's no changing her mind. So you're just going along with it? Liam asked, clearly disappointed in his father. Joseph sighed. I'm trying to minimize the damage. But listen, if it goes to court, there are things you should know. He glanced at his watch nervously. I can't talk now. I'll call you. We drove home in tense silence. I was terrified of going to court. We couldn't afford a lawyer, and Jessica had made it clear she was willing to play dirty. What if a judge believed her lies? What if they took Noah away? When we got home, I put Noah down for a nap, and then broke down crying at the kitchen table. Dad awkwardly patted my shoulder, then surprised me by making hot chocolate, something he used to do when I was little and upset. We'll figure this out, he said, sliding a mug toward me. I promise. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat in my room looking at Noah in his crib. He was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm surrounding him. I took out my phone and started researching custody laws, trying to understand what we were up against. The legal jargon made my head spin, but one thing was clear. Without a lawyer, our chances weren't good. The next morning, Joseph called Liam as promised. He said Jessica had been gathering evidence against me for weeks. The doctored photos Barbara mentioned, statements from people claiming they'd seen me neglecting Noah, even medical records she'd somehow obtained through her friend at the clinic. He warned that she was planning to file for emergency custody, claiming Noah was in immediate danger. When? Liam asked, his voice tight with worry. Tomorrow, Joseph replied. I've been trying to talk her out of it, but she won't listen. She's convinced she's doing the right thing. After hanging up, Liam relayed the conversation to me, Dad, and Grandma. We were running out of time and options. That's when Grandma suggested something unexpected. What if we went public with what Jessica's doing? She said. Small town like this, reputation matters. If people knew she was trying to stall a baby from his mother, Dad shook his head. That could backfire. What if people believe her version instead? I thought about the tape recordings I'd been collecting, Jessica's threats, her admission that she was using her resources against us, her manipulation. Maybe there was a way to use them. That afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number. Jessica filed the emergency petition. Hearing scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Joseph, panic set in. We had less than 24 hours to prepare. Dad called around trying to find a lawyer who would help us on short notice, but the few who were willing wanted thousands of dollars up front, money we didn't have. That evening, while I was feeding Noah, there was a knock at the door. Dad answered it and came back looking confused, holding a thick manila envelope. Some kid on a bike delivered this, he said, handing it to me. Wouldn't say who it was from. Inside was a USB drive and a note that said simply, use this if you need to. Good luck tomorrow. We plugged the USB into Dad's old laptop. It contained dozens of files, emails between Jessica and various people, including her friend at the hospital where I'd taken Noah for his checkups. She'd been trying to get his medical records illegally. There were also screenshots of text messages where she discussed her plan to get custody of Noah, admitting it was to free Liam from his mistake. Most damning of all, there was a recorded phone call where she offered money to someone to testify that they'd seen me neglecting Noah. We were shocked. Who had sent this? The only person who made sense was Joseph. But would he really turn against his wife like that? Regardless of where it came from, we now had evidence of Jessica's manipulation and illegal actions. The question was, how to use it effectively without a lawyer to guide us. Grandma had an idea. Her neighbor's daughter Patricia was a paralegal at a law firm in the next town over. Maybe she could give us some advice, even if she couldn't represent us. It was worth a shot. Patricia agreed to meet us that night after work. She reviewed the evidence in our case, explaining that while she couldn't represent us in court, she could help us prepare. She stayed until midnight, helping us organize our evidence and coaching me on what to say and how to behave in court. The judge will be looking at what's in the best interest of the child, Patricia explained. You need to show that you're a responsible, loving mother who can provide a stable home for Noah. The next morning, I dressed in the most professional outfit I owned, black pants and a blue blouse I'd worn to a school presentation last year. I did my hair neatly and put on minimal makeup, trying to look mature and responsible. Dad wore a tie for the first time in years, and Grandma wore her church dress. Liam met us at the courthouse, looking nervous in dress pants and a button-up shirt. Jessica and Joseph were already there with their attorney. Jessica looked perfectly put together in an expensive-looking suit, her hair and makeup flawless. She gave me a smug smile as we walked in, clearly confident in her victory. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with just a few rows of seats and a raised desk where the judge would sit. Our case was called, and we all moved to the front. Jessica's attorney William spoke first, painting a picture of me as an irresponsible teenager who had hidden her pregnancy and kept a newborn in unsafe conditions. He mentioned the CPS investigation and implied that I was unfit to care for Noah. When it was my turn to speak, my voice shook at first, but I remembered Patricia's advice and took a deep breath. I explained how I had been afraid to tell my dad about the pregnancy because of our difficult relationship, how Grandma had helped me, and how we had made the basement as safe and comfortable as possible for Noah during those first few weeks. I admitted it wasn't ideal, but emphasized that I had always put Noah's needs first. Then I presented the evidence from the USB drive, explaining how Jessica had been manipulating the situation from the beginning. The judge looked increasingly concerned as she reviewed the emails and listened to the recorded phone call. Jessica's face went from smug to panicked. Her attorney tried to object, saying the evidence had been obtained illegally, but the judge overruled him. She wanted to hear everything. When I played the recording of Jessica threatening me in the grocery store, Jessica stood up, her face red with anger. "She's lying," she shouted. "She's manipulated those recordings." The judge called for order and asked Jessica to sit down. William was whispering urgently to her, trying to get her to calm down, but she she shook him off. This is ridiculous, Jessica continued, her voice rising. We can provide a proper home for that child. She's just a child herself. The judge banged her gavel. Mrs. Reese, control yourself, or I'll hold you in contempt. Jessica sat down, but the damage was done. Her outburst had shown her true colors. The judge called a brief recess to review all the evidence. As we waited outside the courtroom, I noticed Joseph talking quietly to Liam. He looked defeated. When we returned to the courtroom, the judge announced her decision. She denied Jessica's petition for emergency custody, citing concerns about her methods and motivations. She also ordered Jessica to stay away from me and Noah pending a full investigation into her actions. The court's primary concern is the well-being of the child, the judge said. Based on the evidence presented today, I see a young mother who, despite difficult circumstances, is doing her best to provide for her son. I also see troubling evidence of manipulation and possibly illegal actions by the petitioner. Relief washed over me. We had won, at least for now. Jessica stormed out of the courtroom, not even waiting for her attorney. Joseph approached us awkwardly. I'm sorry about all this, he said to Liam. Your mother, she means well, but she goes too far sometimes. Did you send us that USB drive? I asked quietly. Joseph hesitated, then gave a small nod. I couldn't let her do this. It wasn't right. As we left the courthouse, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Noah was still mine. We still had challenges ahead. I needed to finish school, find a job, figure out how to be a good parent, but at least I didn't have to worry about losing him. That evening, as I was putting Noah to bed, Dad knocked on my bedroom door. He looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot in the doorway. I've been thinking, he said slowly, about what Grandma said, about me making you feel like a burden. I didn't know what to say, so I just waited. I didn't handle things well when your mom left, he continued. I was angry and hurt, and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair. He stepped into the room and looked down at Noah in his crib. I don't want him to ever feel the way I made you feel, and I don't want you to feel that way anymore either. It wasn't exactly an apology, but coming from my dad, it was huge. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without crying. We're going to do better, he said firmly. All of us. For Noah. As he turned to leave, I found my voice. Dad, what really happened with Mom? Why did she leave? He paused in the doorway, his shoulders tense. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed. That's a conversation for another day, he said quietly, but I promise we'll have it soon. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was a start. A promise of honesty and maybe, eventually, healing. As I looked down at Noah, peaceful in his sleep, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had a long way to go, but for the first time, I felt like we might actually make it. The next morning, I woke up to Noah's babbling through the baby monitor. I'd actually slept for 5 straight hours, which felt like a miracle. The court victory against Jessica had lifted this massive weight off my shoulders. I wasn't naive enough to think she'd just give up completely, but at least we had some breathing room. Dad was already in the kitchen making coffee when I came down with Noah. He awkwardly offered to hold him while I made myself breakfast. It was still weird seeing my dad being all grandfatherly, but I handed Noah over and grabbed some cereal. I called work, Dad said, bouncing Noah on his knee. Told them I need to switch to day shift for a while. Figure it'll be easier for all of us if I'm around more in the evenings. I nearly choked on my Cheerios. Dad had worked nights at the factory for as long as I could remember. He always said the night shift paid better. Really? What did they say? Boss wasn't thrilled, but I've been there 15 years. They'll make it work. He shrugged like it wasn't a big deal, but it was. It was huge. Later that day, Liam came over after his shift at the grocery store. He looked exhausted. Turns out Jessica had been on a rampage since the court hearing. She'd thrown his stuff onto the front lawn and changed the locks. Joseph had let him back in when she wasn't home, but the situation was getting worse. She keeps saying I betrayed the family, Liam said, slumped on our couch with Noah asleep on his chest. Dad's sleeping in the guest room. They're barely speaking. I felt terrible. Their family was falling apart because of me. Well, because of Jessica's obsession with controlling Liam's life. But still, you can stay here if you need to, Dad offered, surprising both of us. Couch isn't great, but it's better than walking into World War III every night. Liam looked at me, eyebrows raised. I nodded. It made sense. He was already spending most of his time here anyway, and with Dad switching to days, he'd be home in the evenings to make sure we weren't, not that we had the energy for anything with a newborn baby anyway. The next few weeks settled into a weird new normal. Liam slept on our couch and helped with Noah before and after his shifts at the grocery store. Dad taught him how to change the oil in his car and fix a leaky faucet. I started doing online classes to finish elevated school while Noah napped. Grandma came over most days to help out and cook actual meals instead of the frozen pizza and mac and cheese we'd been living on. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. Noah was growing like crazy, smiling all the time now. The CPS case was still technically open, but Barbara had told us it was just a formality at this point. As long as we kept taking Noah to his checkups and I stayed in school, everything would be fine. Then one Tuesday afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I was alone with Noah, Dad was at work, and Liam was at school. I peeked through the window and saw a woman I didn't recognize. She was maybe in her 30s with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She didn't look like another CPS worker or one of Jessica's friends, so I cautiously opened the door. Can I help you? I asked, holding Noah on my hip. The woman stared at Noah with this weird intensity that made me take a step back. Her eyes were exactly like mine, exactly like Noah's. Casey, she said, her voice shaky. I'm Mary. I'm your mother. I nearly slammed the door in her face. My mom, the woman who abandoned me as a baby, was standing on our porch like it was totally normal to show up after 16 years. I felt dizzy. What are you doing here? I managed to ask, tightening my grip on Noah. Your grandmother called me, she said. She thought, with everything that's happened, that it was time. I was going to call Grandma. How dare she contact my mom without telling me? I stood there frozen, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to scream at this woman to leave. Another part had a million questions I'd been saving up my whole life. Can I come in? She asked, just to talk. I understand if you don't want to. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. She walked into our living room, looking around at the baby toys scattered everywhere, the blankets folded on the couch where Liam slept. I didn't offer her anything to drink or invite her to sit. I just stood there, waiting. He's beautiful, she said, nodding toward Noah. What's his name? Noah, I replied automatically. Why are you here? Really? Mary sighed and sat down on the edge of the couch. couch. Your grandmother told me about the custody battle, about this woman trying to take your baby. It brought up a lot of things for me. I stayed standing, keeping Noah close. What things? Things I should have told you a long time ago. She looked down at her hands. Things about why I left. I'd imagined this conversation so many times over the years. In my head, I was always cool and detached, telling her I didn't care why she left, that I was fine without her. But now that she was actually here, I found myself sitting down across from her, desperate to finally know the truth. Your dad and I were so young when I got pregnant, she started. 17, just like you were. His parents wanted nothing to do with me or the baby. My parents, your grandparents, were supportive, but they couldn't support us financially. We were on our own. This wasn't news to me. Grandma had told me this much. Your dad left when I was about 6 months pregnant, Mary continued. Just disappeared. No note, no call, nothing. I had you alone, lived with my parents, tried to make it work. It was hard, but we were managing. I glanced down at Noah, trying to imagine doing all this without Liam, without dad, without grandma. It would be impossible. Then when you were about 8 months old, your dad showed up again, said he'd changed, wanted to be a family. I was so tired, so lonely. I believed him. Her voice cracked. We got a little apartment together. Things were okay for a few weeks. Then he started drinking, staying out late. We fought all the time. She paused, like she was trying to find the right words. One night it got bad, really bad. He'd never hit me before, but that night I was scared, Casey. Scared for myself and scared for you. I felt sick. Dad had hit her. He'd never been violent with me, ever. Emotionally distant, sure. Verbally harsh sometimes, definitely. But physical? Never. I packed a bag while he was passed out, took you to my parents' house. The next day he showed up, sober and crying, swearing it would never happen again. My mom wanted me to stay away from him, but my dad, he thought everyone deserved a second chance. Said your dad was just a kid who'd made a mistake. Mary wiped at her eyes. So I went back. Things were better for a while. Then one night, about 2 months later, it happened again. Worse this time. I had to go to the emergency room. Your grandparents took care of you while I was there. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This didn't sound like my dad at all. But why would she lie about this? When I got out of the hospital, I went to get you from my parents. But your dad had already been there. He'd told them I was mentally unstable, that I'd hurt myself and was making up stories about him. He had bruises too. Said I'd attacked him. He'd convinced them to let him take you. That's not possible, I said, finding my voice. Grandma would never have let him take me if she thought he was dangerous. Not your grandmother, your grandfather, Mary clarified. He always liked your dad. Thought he was just misunderstood. By the time my mom got home from work, you were gone. Your dad had taken you to his parents' house. I remembered Grandma saying that Grandpa had died when I was about 2. I'd never really known him. I tried to get you back, Mary continued, but I had no money for a lawyer. Your dad's parents suddenly decided they wanted to be involved now that he had custody. They hired an attorney. They painted me as unstable, unfit. The court gave him temporary custody while they investigated. She took a deep breath. Then your dad disappeared with you. Just packed up and moved in the middle of the night. His parents claimed they didn't know where he'd gone. By the time I tracked you down 6 months later, the custody order was permanent. The court said it would be too disruptive to move you again. I was struggling to process all this. It contradicted everything I'd believed my whole life. Why didn't you keep fighting? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I did, for years, she said. But every time I got close, your dad would move again. Eventually, I ran out of money, out of resources. Your grandmother kept in touch, sent me pictures when she could. She promised to look out for you. So you just gave up? I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. I never gave up on you, Casey, but I had to stop chasing. It was destroying me, and it wasn't helping you. Your grandmother promised she'd tell you the truth when you were old enough to understand. I thought about all the times Grandma had tried to talk to me about my mom, how I'd shut her down because I was so angry. Had she been trying to tell me this all along? Why now? I asked. Why come back now? Because history is repeating itself, Mary said simply. This woman trying to take your baby. I couldn't let it happen to you too. And your grandmother thought maybe knowing the truth about your dad might help you understand some things. As if on cue, we heard a car pull into the driveway. Dad was home early. I panicked, not ready for this confrontation. But before I could say anything, the front door opened and Dad walked in. He stopped dead when he saw Mary, his face draining of color like he'd seen a ghost. Mary, he said, his voice strange. What are you doing here? Hello, Thomas, she replied calmly, though I could see her hands shaking. I think it's time we all talked, don't you? Dad looked from her to me, then to Noah in my arms. Something in his face crumpled. Without a word, he walked into the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator open and close, then he came back with 3 beers. He handed one to Mary, one to me, then sat down heavily in his chair. I guess Ellen finally told you everything, he said to me, opening his beer. Grandma called her, I replied, not touching my beer. I was still breastfeeding anyway. Is it true, what she said about why she left? Dad took a long drink, then set the can down carefully. Some of it, not all. Which parts aren't true? Mary challenged, her voice stronger now. I never hit you, Dad said firmly. Never. You know that's not what happened. Mary laughed bitterly. Still denying it after all these years? I had the hospital records, Thomas. The police report. The police report that said it was inconclusive? Dad shut back. Because it was. You were having episodes, Mary. Paranoia. Depression. You'd disappear for days, then come back with these wild stories. I looked between them, completely lost. They were describing 2 totally different realities. I was depressed because you were emotionally abusive, Mary said. The disappearing was me staying with my parents when things got bad. Your parents, Dad scoffed. Your dad was an alcoholic who could barely remember his own name half the time. Your mom enabled him for years, then suddenly decided I was the problem. This was getting us nowhere. I stood up, Noah fussing in my arms from all the tension in the room. Stop it, both of you, I said. I don't care about your ancient history. I care about now, about Noah, about why you're really here, Mom. It felt weird calling her that. She wasn't my mom, not really. She was just a stranger who happened to have given birth to me. Mary softened. I'm here because I don't want you to lose your baby the way I lost you. I'm here because I want a chance to know my daughter and my grandson. And yes, I'm here because I think you deserve to know the truth about your father. My truth or your truth, Dad muttered. How about the actual truth? I snapped. Grandma said you abandoned Mom when she was pregnant, then showed up years later. her. Is that true? Dad looked uncomfortable. I panicked when I found out she was pregnant. I was 17, scared out of my mind. I went to stay with my cousin in Ohio for a few months. It was wrong, I know that, but I came back before you were born. You came back when I was 8 months pregnant, Mary corrected. After your parents cut you off and you needed a place to stay. Dad didn't deny this. That was telling. And then what happened? I pressed. After I was born, they both started talking at once, their stories diverging again. According to Dad, Mary had postpartum depression that turned into something more serious. According to Mary, Dad was controlling and abusive, isolating her from her family. The only thing they seemed to agree on was that they fought constantly, and that eventually, Dad got custody of me and left town. I was getting a headache trying to figure out who was telling the truth. Maybe they both believed their own versions. Maybe the truth was somewhere in the middle. Look, I finally said, interrupting their bickering. I don't know what really happened between you two, but I do know that Dad's been here, raising me, however imperfectly. And you haven't, I said to Mary. So if you're here expecting some big mother-daughter reunion, I'm sorry, but that's not happening. Mary looked hurt, but nodded. I understand. I just want a chance to know you, Casey, and Noah, on whatever terms you're comfortable with. I looked at Dad. Despite everything I just heard, he was still my dad, the person who'd been there, even when he was emotionally distant, the person who was trying to do better now. I need time to think, I said honestly. This is a lot to process. Mary stood up. Of course. I'm staying at the Holiday Inn for a few days. Here's my number. She handed me a slip of paper. Call me if you want to talk more. After she left, Dad and I sat in silence for a long time. Noah had fallen asleep in my arms, oblivious to the emotional tornado that had just blown through our lives. I wasn't perfect, Dad finally said. I made a lot of mistakes, but I never hit your mother, Casey. Never. I nodded. Not because I necessarily believed him, but because I didn't know what else to do. I'm going to put Noah down for his nap. Upstairs in my room, I laid Noah in his crib and just watched him sleep for a while, his little chest rising and falling, his perfect tiny fingers. I thought about what Mary had said, about history repeating itself. Was that what was happening? Was Jessica trying to take Noah the way Dad had supposedly taken me? But it wasn't the same. Jessica wasn't Noah's parent. She had no right to him. And whatever had happened between my parents, Dad had legal custody of me. He might not have been father of the year, but he'd kept me fed, housed, and safe. I called Grandma that evening after Dad went to bed. I was still mad at her for contacting my mom without telling me, but I needed her perspective. Why didn't you ever tell me the whole story? I asked as soon as she picked up. Grandma sighed. I tried, sweetheart, so many times, but you were either too young to understand or too angry to listen. And your father, he made it clear there would be consequences if I told you certain things. What things? What really happened, Grandma? The truth is complicated, she said carefully. Your mother struggled after you were born. That part is true. But your father, he had a temper back then. A bad one. There were incidents. Did he hit her? I asked directly. Grandma was quiet for a moment. There was one night. I came to your apartment and found your mother with bruises. Your father said she'd fallen. She told me a different story when he wasn't around. I closed my eyes, trying to reconcile this with the father I knew. But he's never been violent with me. Ever. People change, Casey. Losing your mother, having to raise you alone, it sobered him up in more ways than one. I think he's carried a lot of guilt all these years. That actually made sense. The drinking, the emotional distance, the constant reminders that I'd ruined his life. Maybe it wasn't about me at all. Maybe it was about his own guilt. What should I do about Mary? I asked. She wants to be in my life, in Noah's life. That's entirely up to you, sweetheart, Grandma said. She's made mistakes too, but she's never stopped loving you. After we hung up, I sat on my bed thinking for a long time about parents and children, about mistakes and forgiveness, about the cycles we repeat and the ones we break. The next morning, I called Mary and invited her to come over. I also texted Liam and asked him to be there. This affected him and Noah too. When Mary arrived, we all sat in the living room. Me, Liam, Mary, and Dad. Noah was happily playing in his bouncer, oblivious to the tension. I've been thinking about everything, I started, and I don't know if I'll ever know exactly what happened between you two, but I do know that I don't want Noah growing up in the middle of adult conflicts the way I did. I looked at Dad. You've been trying to do better lately. I see that, and I appreciate it. Then I turned to Mary. I'm not ready for a mother-daughter relationship. I don't know if I'll ever be, but I'm willing to get to know you slowly, as a person. And if that goes well, maybe you can be part of Noah's life too. Mary nodded, tears in her eyes. That's more than I hoped for. Thank you. There are conditions, I continued. No bad-mouthing each other in front of Noah. No trying to turn him against anyone. No using him as a pawn the way I was used. Both my parents nodded solemnly. And one more thing, I said, looking directly at Dad. I need you to tell me the truth someday. The whole truth. When you're ready. Dad looked down at his hands, then back at me. I will. I promise. It wasn't a perfect solution. There were still a lot of unanswered questions and unresolved feelings, but it was a start. A chance to break the cycle. To do better for Noah than our parents had done for us. As for Jessica, we didn't hear from her for a while after the court hearing. Joseph told Liam she'd gone to stay with her sister in Florida. Maybe she was finally accepting that she couldn't control Liam's life anymore, or maybe she was just regrouping for another attack. Either way, we were ready. Liam eventually moved into Grandma's house after she offered him her spare room. It made more sense than him sleeping on our couch forever, and it gave us some space to figure out our relationship without the pressure of living together. He still came over every day to see Noah, and we were slowly building a future together. I finished my elevated school classes online and even started taking some community college courses. Dad switched permanently to day shift and became surprisingly involved with Noah. Sometimes I'd come home to find them napping together on the couch. Noah sprawled across Dad's chest. Mary kept her promise to take things slow. We'd meet for coffee once a week, just talking and getting to know each other. I wasn't ready to call her mom yet, but I was starting to see her as a person, not just the woman who abandoned me. One evening, about 6 months after everything happened, Dad came into my room while I was getting Noah ready for bed. He sat on the edge of my bed and watched us for a minute. I hit her, he said quietly. Your mother. Not often, just twice. But that was twice too many. I stopped what I was doing, shocked that he was finally admitting it. I was drinking a lot back then, angry all the time, scared of failing as a father. He stared down at his hands. It's no excuse. There is no excuse. But I want you to know that I've regretted regretted it every day since. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was angry that he'd lied for so long. Another part was relieved to finally know the truth. I took you because I was afraid, he continued. Afraid she'd keep you from me. Afraid of what would happen to you if I wasn't around. And then once I had you, I was terrified of screwing up. So I kept everyone at a distance. Even you. He looked up at me, his eyes wet. I'm sorry, Casey, for all of it. I nodded, not quite ready to say I forgave him, but acknowledging his apology. It was another step forward. As I put Noah to bed that night, I thought about how complicated families are, how we hurt each other, disappoint each other, but somehow still love each other through it all. How we carry our parents' mistakes with us, but we don't have to repeat them. Noah wouldn't grow up thinking he was a burden. He wouldn't grow up in the middle of custody battles or family secrets. He would grow up knowing he was loved by me, by Liam, by his grandparents, all of them, even Jessica in her misguided way. It wasn't the family I'd imagined, but it was ours, and we were making it work, one day at a time.